In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God of our fathers, who brought the martyr St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross to know your crucified Son, and to imitate him even until death, grant through her intercession that the whole human race may acknowledge Christ as its Savior, and through him come to behold you for eternity, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever. Amen. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Bishop Wall. Welcome, everybody. This is going to be our first podcast. This is a joint podcast between the Subcommittee Native American Affairs at the USCCB and the Tekakwitha Conference. So hopefully we'll do all these podcasts once a month. And our first guest on this podcast is our Bishop Wall, who is the chair of the Subcommittee of Native American Affairs at the USCCB and the Bishop of Gallup, New Mexico.
So my name is Robert Barbary. I'm the executive director here at the Tekakwitha Conference and a member of the Tunica Biloxi tribe in Louisiana.
Yeah, I'm Father David Bailey. I spent since the mid-90s working with natives from tribes all across the United States, Oklahoma to Montana, South Dakota, Arizona. I'm a priest for the Diocese of Tyler, which is in East Texas, and yeah, I have at least 30 years worth of experience working with various native communities, relationships which I continue to maintain to this day.
I'm Father Michael Carson. I'm the Assistant Director for Native American Affairs at the USCCB.
As Father Carson said in the beginning, today we're going to be speaking with Bishop Wall of Gallup, New Mexico. Bishop Wall, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Robert. Thank you very much. You want me to give a little intro on who I am and my background, or okay?
Yes, great. Let's begin there.
So I'm the Bishop of the Diocese of Gallup, New Mexico, and Gallup, New Mexico. The diocese is in two states, Arizona and New Mexico, and we have 7 Native American tribes. And of all the dioceses in the United States, we have the highest percentage of Native Americans. And then I'm also the chairman of the Subcommittee for Native American Affairs. So you and I and Father Carson have worked together quite a bit over the past few years.
Now, Bishop, I was doing some reading the other day on your diocese, and I read that the Diocese of Gallup was established to better serve the Native American population back in the 1930s. Can you tell us a little bit about that history?
Sure. So back in 1936, Eugenio Pacelli, who at the time was the Secretariat for the Vatican State, was invited by St. Catherine Drexel to come to the area, which is now the Diocese of Gallup, and to see the area. The reason for that was she believed that if the diocese weren't established, the Native American peoples could easily be lost in that area, and there was such a high concentration of them. And so in 1936, he was making a trip to the United States and visiting places like Baltimore and New York and Boston and Chicago, all the normal places you would think that a dignitary would visit. And he also visited the area, which is now the Diocese of Gallup. So that was 1936. 3 years later, he's elected as the successor of St. Peter, chooses the name Pius XII, and if not the first, one of the first dioceses that he established was the Diocese of Gallup, with that primary ministry to minister to and amongst the Native American peoples. And so I always, I really hold him in high regard, because he came, he met the people, he listened to the people, and he saw the need. And one of the first things he did when he was elected as the new Pope was to establish the diocese.
Now, you're from the Southwest, correct?
I am. I was actually born in the diocese. So I was born in Ganado, which is on the Navajo reservation. My family lived in Chinle. My father was a teacher and a football coach at the public high school. And that's also where my parents became Catholic. And so when I was about almost a year old, we moved down to the Phoenix area. Grew up in Chandler, Arizona. And so I've spent my entire life in the Southwest. And so yeah, I'm a native Arizonan and a native to the Southwest.
I'd imagine that your background has prepared you for your work today as bishop.
Sure. Yeah. We're right where I am. we're right next to Bapchul, Saskatoon. Probably they would be famous because that's where Ira Hayes was. He was from there. He was one of the flag bearers at Iwo Jima. And so that's right next to me. So the town I grew up in, it was a little farming town. We had a lot of Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, Anglos. We had quite a mixture of ethnicities and peoples from all kinds of different backgrounds. But we had, not only being born and having experience on the Navajo reservation, but then also growing up in the Phoenix area, you have a lot of people who are Native Americans but live in the urban center. But then we're surrounded right around us a lot of different reservations. So a lot of guys I went to school with were Native Americans themselves.
Now, as Bishop of Gallup, you've had the distinct honor of chairing the Subcommittee for Native American Affairs. And one of the initiatives that your committee has taken up in your tenure is a pastoral plan. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a previous plan back in the 1970s.
Yeah, 1977. If you think about it, that's when Paul VI was the Pope, and since then we had JP1, JP2, Benedict, and now Pope Francis, and that's a long time ago. A lot has happened or taken place, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're taking up this endeavor to produce a pastoral plan, a new pastoral plan for Native American ministry. Yeah, it's a lot's taken place. Lots gone on since then.
Yeah, and so the pastoral plan has been developed by the Subcommittee for Native American Affairs, and you actually received some good news at the most recent general meeting for bishops. I think you got an approval to do what?
We did. So we brought the plan before the entire body of bishops, and it was a virtual meeting because of COVID. We weren't able to be together, but we brought the entire plan before the body of bishops, talked about the need for the plan, and then we also had gave an opportunity for the bishops to ask questions and make comments, and overwhelmingly people were so in favor of it, and it was just positive all the way around. And I think one of the neat things too is we even heard from bishops that weren't part of the subcommittee, giving us suggestions on things to think about and adding to it and including in it. I think one of the things I remember was Bishop Ed Clark. He's an auxiliary in Los Angeles, works with the Native communities, and he wanted to make sure that there was a good voice from Native American Catholics who don't live on reservations, who might live in big urban centers. And so we said that's something we've already been thinking about too. And so it was overwhelming. It was an overwhelming show of support for us to move forward with it. And you need that because if it's a statement that comes from a subcommittee, or a statement that just comes from a committee, it doesn't have as much strength. And what we wanted this to be is a statement that comes from the entire body of the bishops. So everybody is behind it full force, and that's what we received in the vote too. So very, very positive.
And for those who are watching or listening and are unfamiliar with the process, I think it's understandable that anything worth doing takes a long time. And the approval that was received is kind of like a step one, and now the hard work begins. I understand that there are scholars and Native Catholics and other prelates and clergy who are all coming together to sort of craft what this plan is going to be. What sort of timeline can we expect from now to the laity seeing this plan come to fruition?
That is a great question. A lot of that has to do with the work that we do, the writing committee does, and then the work of the subcommittee. And so, you have the work of the writing committee, you have the work going through the subcommittee, and then coming to the standing committee, which is cultural diversity. And then once it goes through there, then eventually it will come to the body of the church, or the body of the conference. And then we'll present, give people a chance to read through it, make suggestions, corrections, additions, subtractions, all sorts of things. And then eventually we'll come to a vote. That's a really good question. I would say, not soon enough. That's the timeline, but
Sure.
But we want to make sure if we're going to do it, we're going to do it well, and that can take some time. So Father Carson he knows it much better than I, but I would hope that within a year and a half, we could get this could move forward.
Yeah. And, you mentioned, not soon enough. And I think that's very appropriate, given the recent revelations that have sort of come out of Canada. What began with Kamloops and then has spread to other schools, revealing these unmarked graves, which I think the terminology is important here, unmarked graves versus mass graves.
Yeah.
How was this news affecting your ministry and the ministry of the committee?
Well, obviously we were concerned about what we were hearing. Obviously, that's for us, our theology is that graves are holy places where people are buried, where they should rest in peace, and we should take care of them. That's our Catholic theology. So it's sad whenever you hear anything about an unmarked grave, or a grave that's not taken care of, or something that's fallen into disrepair. So that was sad news for us. And but kind of the thing that moved us forward, I think, with all of this and this pastoral plan was a couple of years ago, we had a listening session with Native American Catholics from around the United States. And we brought together bishops that were on the subcommittee, and some bishops that had a really high percentage of Native Americans in their diocese. And we just simply wanted to listen, 24 hours, great session. And one of the things that we kept hearing over and over and over was for us to be able to address in just a really good pastoral sensitive way the history of the boarding schools. And so that's been something that's been on our radar all the way through this. And so when we heard the recent news, I think our approach is to continue to listen, to continue to gather information, and continue to respond to this to the best of our ability, always by shining the light of the gospel on the situation. And if there's any pain or hurt or anything that's gone wrong in the past, we always have to bring the gospel. We have to bring the presence of Christ into it. And so this is something we've been talking about, but I would say with the recent information coming out of Canada, it's really moved it to the front of the line.
Exactly. I, as a Native person and a Catholic myself, this news was obviously very distressing.
Sure.
And even among Natives here in the U.S., there's a renewed sort of push for similar investigations to take place here in the United States.
Sure.
So I think anyone who's engaged in Native ministry, especially bishops, what happened in Canada, it captivated the news cycle, but I don't think it's over. I think we should expect to see future reports come about, and I think this news is going to be with us for some time, and the church is going to have to decide, how do we respond? How do we help to acknowledge and confront and then heal?
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question real quick. You are first and foremost a pastor, right? You're a shepherd.
Yeah.
What message would you give to viewers or listeners who are hurt, who are filled with disappointment, anger, about all the resurgence of this news about the boarding school period and the role of the church?
Yeah. I would say, you mentioned too, first and foremost, a pastor, and to be a pastor, to act pastorally, means to act with the heart and the mind of Jesus. And so I'd say that the church is here for you specifically for that. for the presence of Christ. To not be afraid to bring forward your pain, suffering, anger, whatever the case. Don't be afraid to bring that forward. And because the church needs to be here, the church needs to listen, and the church needs to address whatever sort of wrong, or whatever sort of pain, or any sort of healing that needs to be there. And so, our role, first and foremost, is always to have the heart and the mind of Jesus, to shine the light of the gospel on any situation, and we don't want to turn a blind eye or just kind of hope that a bad situation just simply goes away. We want to be able to address it, and we want to be able to bring the healing of Jesus to it. So we have to look at everything. Can't be afraid of it, and have to look at everything. I think if we look in our past maybe 20, 25 years and look at the stuff with the sexual abuse crisis, our role was to address it, and even acknowledge if there were wrongs, to acknowledge those wrongs. Yeah. So we need to do the same with this situation.
And I think, everything you've just stated sort of highlights the necessary role of the subcommittee within the broader bishops' conference. And on that note, I want to, talk about your tenure for a minute with that committee. I'm correct in understanding that your tenure as chairman of the Subcommittee for Native American Affairs is coming to a close.
It is. So six years, and I served on the committee, I think 3 or 4 years prior to that. So I served as a member of the subcommittee, and in the last 6 years, I've served as the chair. And that automatically puts you as a member of the Cultural Diversity Committee. So the voice of the Native American Subcommittee, you're that to the Cultural Diversity Committee. So yeah, I've been on that for 6 years as chair.
Now, as bishop of a diocese that was especially erected to take care of the Native population and has a considerable Native population within its care, how has your role, both as a member and as chairman of the committee, strengthened your role as Bishop of Gallup?
I heard at our listening session a couple years ago a theme that I heard over and over and over was amongst the leaders that we had there, that they were fearful that the voice of the Native American Catholics wasn't being heard, that they, kind of, to borrow a kind of a line, they did feel as if they had a place at the table. And I think dealing or chairing this subcommittee over the last 6 years, I think it's educated me in terms of the role that as a bishop has with his Native American community. And so I think it's strengthened me in that way, even being in the diocese with the highest percentage of, we're known as the Native American diocese. That's what we're kind of known as. And so I think it's really kind of honed my focus, and maybe gave me a better ear to hear the concerns of the people. Maybe I would hope that it'd give me a greater sensitivity to the needs of the people, and being able to respond to that better. We've you've been a part of this. When we have our meetings, we bring in guest speakers that talk about different things that you might not hear in other committees, or you might not hear on the body of the floor at the USCCB meeting. But we talk about topics that are very, very important to Native American people, especially Native American Catholics. And so I think it's helped me to hear those things, to hear the needs, and I would hope to respond to those in a better way too.
Well, Bishop, we just want to thank you for your ministry, for your commitment, your ongoing commitment to Native Catholics and to all Catholics within your care. Obviously, whenever the Conference of Catholic Bishops makes their announcements later on committee assignments. Do you have any advice for the next chair of the Subcommittee for Native American Affairs?
I do. I know the next chair of the Subcommittee for Native American Affairs. He's outstanding. He's much better than I am. I think the world of him, and I know he has a shepherd's heart. And I know he has an ear that listens to his people, and a real love and care and concern for his people. And I know he's the guy that gets out amongst his people too. So I think that's the most important thing, to be able to listen well, because you can, when in listening well, you hear the hopes and joys, you hear the pains, the sufferings, you hear all the things of your people. And I think that's probably the most important thing to do, especially because out of that listening session, we heard, a fear that the people weren't being heard. So I think to have a heart of the shepherd means to have the heart and the mind of Jesus, and it means to listen to the people.
I couldn't agree more. And Bishop Wall, I want to thank you for being our guest today, for coming on, sort of sharing your heart with us. Even though your road with the subcommittee may be coming to an end, I know you're probably going to cross paths with us many more times in the future. I can't wait to come out and visit the shrine that's being built. It looks beautiful from the progress pictures that I've seen. And I wish you all the best, and I thank you.
Great, Robert. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for everyone's interest in the good work of the subcommittee and the Tekakwitha Conference. And I'm super excited about the future of Catholic Native American ministry in our church.
Yes, me too. So thank you so much, Bishop.
Thank you.
So Father Carson, obviously Bishop mentioned you during the interview with the Pastoral Plan. You're sort of on the ground with the writing team. What are your thoughts on the progress of the Pastoral Plan?
Well, the progress is doing pretty well. We had a lot of very good comments from the General Assembly, things that they want the bishops want in the Pastoral Plan. So we have to go back to drawing board to see how we can fit those in. We have a very good group of Catholic Native American scholars throughout the country from different tribes and different regions, and they're doing a very good job. But it's a long process because we have to get not only a rough draft, but we have to send it to the subcommittees and committees here at the USCCB, including doctrine, to make sure everything's in line with the Catholic Church. So that's a long process. What the bishop referred to is that the first thing we had to do is get permission to do this. And that's what the vote was for General Assembly, that we had to get permission. So now that we received permission, now the hard work comes in to write it and, of course, get it approved through all the various committees and subcommittees of the USCCB. But he was pretty accurate in terms of the timeline. So it'll probably be either this year or next year. Yeah,
and so, Father David, you spent a great deal of time in the Dakota region and in sort of the upper Midwest with some of the tribal communities up there.
Yeah, Montana. Yeah, definitely.
So how do you see their receptivity of this plan?
I know, certainly in Pine Ridge Reservation, and then adjacent to Pine Ridge, just to their east, is Rosebud Reservation. Those are two different bands of the Lakota. You have the Sakonju and Rosebud and Oglala and Pine Ridge. I know the Jesuit presence there. They've been very, very, very busy implementing these things for quite some time. And of course, I think in some ways they're really ahead of the curve in a lot of the things they've been doing. I know, for example, they've been talking about integration of, cultural languages and things like that for a lot longer than most of the rest of the church has. So in some ways, I think they're kind of ahead of the game. But yeah, overall, I would say in South Dakota, at least my experience in South Dakota, which is pretty much the southwestern quadrant of the state, it would be pretty favorable in my assessment.
One thing that I have to think about is that expectations for this plan especially in light of, all this boarding school revelations we're hearing about, are going to be astronomically high. I think people are going to expect a plan that sort of cuts through the noise and speaks to the heart of the matter. And, Father Carson, with all these boarding school revelations, do you see any of that influencing the writing process? Are we going to see anything from the boarding school period sort of intertwined into the language?
Yes, the boarding school period will be first and foremost, not only because we have a lot of very good scholars who have been working on this issue for a very long time, but it's also a concern that's brought out by the bishops themselves, that the bishops want that to be talked about, to be considered, especially steps forward. But yes, it'll be a central part of the pastoral plan.
For one, I'm very appreciative for Bishop Wall and other bishops who are in similar position as him, because even when his time with the committee comes to an end, he's in the Diocese of Gallup. So as long as the Holy Father has him there, Native ministry is his reality. It's something he's going to have to deal with on a regular basis. And so long after he moves on from this committee, he's going to have to help implement this plan. And I think that's sort of the second mountain that we have to climb. Once the plan is written and drafted and released, implementation is the next big hurdle. So what do we envision for implementing this plan? Because it'll obviously inform Native American ministry for the next 15, 20 plus years.
Well, within the pastoral plan itself, they'll give certain steps, very concrete steps on where you go forward. But keep in mind, this is written actually for two audiences. First, it's written for Native American Catholics, those who are already in the ministry and those who are helping the ministry. But it's also written for the Catholic Church in the United States too, for those who are not even familiar with Native American ministry and what Native American ministry is going to try to achieve, their problems and difficulties and concerns, and joys and celebrations of the ministry. So it's written for a pastoral plan, steps forward for both of those audiences.
A lot of, implementing a pastoral plan will necessitate that certain people within the church become more aware of the specific needs of Native communities than they currently are. Certainly, if we want to use the boarding school example, since it's really at the forefront of our thoughts at the moment, there's a surprisingly large amount of people, including bishops, who weren't even aware that took place. And certainly when you talk about other issues that affect Native cultures, and this obviously is certainly pertinent there in Gallup, the missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic. I mean, a lot of these issues are issues that a lot of people in the church aren't currently aware of. So I think implementing a pastoral plan first and foremost means we have to educate our own people, quite frankly. And there's a lot of people in our church who mean well and have great hearts and are all, sincere and all the rest of it, but they're just not informed about a lot of the issues that affect Native communities. And I think before we can go any further, that kind of has to be the first step as far as I can, ascertain.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Prior to working in Native ministry, I worked in diocesan and in parish youth ministry. And even in speaking with some of my former colleagues, and I tell them about the work we're doing with the Tekakwitha Conference, what the bishops are doing, and one of their big reactions is, I had no idea. I had no idea of what the struggle was and what you guys are dealing with. And so, with this plan, I like what Father Carson said about it having two audiences.
Yeah,
and I think
that's absolutely correct. I mean, it is two audiences, yeah, and that's the right approach to it as well. It's it's a diptych, really. But to kind of piggyback on what you're just saying right now about talking to some of your former coworkers, and when I first spoke with Father Mike for the very first time about kind of liaising and kind of working with you guys in various capacities, one of the first things I had that I wanted to talk about was our responsibility regarding the boarding school era But before I could even bring it up, Father Mike already, he brought it up, and he was saying, look, this is already on the list of things that we were already aware of that we need to be working on. And one of the first things that people said to me when I went to them with that information was, we didn't know that the church was already addressing this, that the church was already dealing with this. We didn't know this. And this is people in the church saying, we didn't know that. I didn't know, as a person with, almost 3 decades of experience with natives, I didn't know that it was on our radar. I thought that I was going to be the guy to tell somebody so it would become on the radar, but it already was. So I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the things that we're doing, and I suppose this is obviously one of the great advantages of doing this podcast. A lot of the things we're doing are things people just clearly are not aware of, even our own people.
Yeah. Father Carson, I remember in the wake of all the news from Canada, I reached out to you and you had mentioned how you were being inundated with emails and calls. And I imagine a lot of people were asking you, hey, why is the church not speaking up? And so your job, here in DC became letting them know that work is being done. Do you want to speak to that? Do you want to speak to sort of the that general thought that nothing's being done versus what's actually being done?
Yeah, we have to, before we do anything, we have to figure out what we can do and we cannot do, and what the natives want. Bishop Wall talked about the idea of listening. That's been very important of our job here at the USCCB in the subcommittee. The very first thing we do is listen, but there are different ways of healing and reconciliation depending on the tribes, depending on the people. So it is being addressed at the very highest level, and the Archbishop Gomez, who's the president here, is also very concerned about that. So we're trying to figure out a joint program of all the different committees who are associated and affected by this issue, and how to go about going forward. However, the subcommittee is just not waiting for them. They were also working with religious sisters and religious brothers in their own organization and talking first and foremost about archives. Where's the information stored about boarding schools, and how is the best way to make that public? So we're going through that process too of getting some experts on archival material and just doing some research on ourselves to see where that information is stored and the best way to make that public. So that's one of very important aspects of the subcommittee.
Yeah, definitely. Well, fathers, there's 2 of you. This has been an immensely rewarding experience, getting to sit down with both of you and conduct the interview with Bishop Wall and sort of discuss it afterwards. And, for those of you listening or watching, this is obviously the first of many episodes that we hope to do together. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us today and for taking part in this conversation. We have an exciting guest for next month, and we'll be announcing that pretty soon. So at least on my end, I think, unless you guys have any closing remarks.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for both of you for being our panelists and hearing from what Bishop Wall says. I also like to thank Bishop Wall. He's been an excellent chair. We worked on very well in the Subcommittee of Native American Affairs, and I wish him luck on his new assignment. He's going to be the chair of National Collections, which is a major committee here at the USCCB. So I wish his prayers and luck, and thank him for his great work the last 6 years of working at the chair of Native American Subcommittee. I think we've done a lot of very good work, and that work continues, but deeply appreciate his leadership.
Yeah, and I would just like to say that from my end, I'm certainly very grateful to both of you guys for the great work that you do, and it was obviously a great honor to sit in on that interview with the bishop, and certainly I know he does an immense amount, which no doubt has a significant impact on a lot of Native peoples, and that's great. Lastly, I would just like to say that I think that this is a great endeavor, a great opportunity, because as I said just a moment ago, the real key for us all really is to get the information out there, both to the church and to Native communities and vice versa. Getting the information out there is key, and it has to be a dialogue, because as a very respected Native elder Maria Campbell, who was one of the forerunners in the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement back almost 50 years ago in Canada. One of the, she's a Cree elder. She said to me once in person, she said, what we need regarding Native communities in the Catholic Church is to be better neighbors. And before we can be better neighbors, that requires dialogue. And I think that this is a great step in that direction. So I'm really glad to be a part of this and glad to be with both of you guys as well. So,
well, thank you. And, this was a privilege for me as well. And stay tuned for next month's episode when we continue, as Father David said, to have this dialogue between the church and Indian country. Thank you.